Well, the next country that the Intel site selection team looked at was Mexico. And of course, they didn't look just anywhere in Mexico, but of course, they wanted to select the right location for Intel's needs. And so they looked at the state of Jalisco, Mexico, and specifically in and around the capital of that state, the city of Guadalajara. So you can see on the map, this is Guadalajara. I'm not very good at drawing these states, but more or less that's the state of Jalisco. And the idea here is that that particular state happened to be very attractive in many ways because it had many highly skilled workers. The state in the 1950s, IBM had, for whatever reason, it was finding itself to be very crowded in Mexico City. It had moved its Mexican headquarters to Guadalajara, the vicinity of Guadalajara. And so when IBM did this, it also sort of spurred on the development of that location of technical schools. And you started to see the increase in numbers of technically trained workers. And as a result, this particular area became, really attractive for other high technology companies. You started to see an increase in investment of those kinds of firms in that region to the point that the vicinity of Guadalajara came to be known in Mexico as the Silicon Valley of Mexico, because there were so many electronics manufacturers located in and around that city in the state of Jalisco. So that's why Intel selected that location. Now, Mexico has 31 states, plus the federal district of Mexico City, but Intel, as in Brazil, did not look at, consider other states. It only looked at the state of Jalisco, and specifically the city of, the vicinity of the city of Guadalajara, the Silicon Valley area of Mexico. Now, this is a picture of Old Town Guadalajara, the old, colonial district. Is a very beautiful location. Excuse me, but Intel, of course, did not invest in this part of the city, but the vicinity of that area, there are beautiful, high-tech, modern facilities, major manufacturing plants, those kinds of things. But it is a very attractive location for expatriate executives. It's a safe location. The climate is very good. Lots of people retire. Lots of U.S. citizens retire to Guadalajara because, it's such a very nice location for expatriates. It's a big city, about 8 million people in the greater metropolitan region of Guadalajara. So, certainly Intel would not have any problems finding sufficient numbers of skilled workers in this location. So if you look at the positives of Mexico, and specifically, of course, I'm going to write on here, we're talking about specifically the state of Jalisco. This is a very attractive location for so many reasons. This particular part of Mexico had, highly trained workers, skilled workers. The thousands of mid-level technicians would be readily available. So that would not be an issue for Intel. Also, there were, excellent universities, so they would find the hundreds of engineers that they needed very easily and at relatively low cost because there were so many top-notch universities. In the city of Guadalajara at the time, there were over 12 universities that had excellent engineering programs, including a branch of the Tech of Monterrey, Monterrey Tech, and of course that's the MIT of Mexico that produces very high-quality engineers, at low cost. And I don't know why I'm doing that quotation signs, but I'm just trying to emphasize that this is the MIT of Mexico, a top-notch university, and so Intel would not have essentially really any problem finding the adequate skilled personnel that they needed in this location. Transportation infrastructure, plenty of flights in and out from the city of Guadalajara, that wouldn't be an issue either. And of course, think about this. Mexico was a member of NAFTA and still, of course, is a member of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And what that means, of course, is that anything manufactured in Mexico could be exported to the United States at zero tariffs. So as long as Intel met the rules of origin requirements that, more than 50% of whatever was produced in Mexico as they would, then of course these products could be exported to the United States very easily. And think about this, the proximity. to the United States. It would take just a couple of hours to get to the United States from Guadalajara by air. So really, for all of these reasons, this was a very attractive location. And on top of that, as I mentioned, a safe location, a great place for expatriates to live, really excellent place in so many ways. Now, there were some negatives associated with Mexico, and the Intel site selection team noticed this right away. Now, I want to emphasize that when they went to Guadalajara and the state of Jalisco, they met with the State Investment Promotion Agency, and you'll see it spelled out in the case. It's a very long-winded name for this, the Secretariat of Economic Promotion for the state of Jalisco, SEPROE. And what is interesting about this is this was a government agency, a very excellent investment promotion agency at the state level, promoting foreign direct investment into the state of Jalisco. But it really was just sort of beginning at the time Intel was coming in there. So I think that in some ways, perhaps, SEPROE, as good as it was, maybe did not really understand some aspects of Intel. They didn't really have the sort of, the same sort of training that you might have expected. They didn't necessarily have MBAs, from U.S. universities. Perhaps the top officials in SEPROE did, but in some ways you could say Intel wasn't as understood by this investment promotion agencies as they would find later when they went to Costa Rica. So I think when SEPROE was explaining some aspects of the Mexican business environment to the Intel team, they're actually taken very much by surprise and somewhat alarmed by the answers they received. So let me just give you an example. One of the concerns that Intel had is when SEPROE was explaining the regulations in Mexico to them, was when they learned that, in Mexico, if any 2 employees in your company, if you have a company with over 20 employees and any 2 of those employees decide they want to join one of the national labor unions, you have to let them, right? That's the Mexican labor law. And so Intel said, well, that could be an issue for us. What if, this happens? So what the SEPROE officials did is they explained to Intel, well, don't worry about that. There's a way around that rule. Now, what I think was a sort of a misunderstanding here is that the SEPROE officials did not understand how much that would really alarm the Intel site selection team. They were so concerned about not having any special deals, not doing anything that would be unpredictable or lack transparency, that when they heard this, oh, don't worry, there's a way around that rule, they got very concerned. Now, what the SEPROE officials explained was what so many U.S. companies were doing at the time and still do, is how to deal with the potential issue of the labor unions. And so an executive might say, well, gee, my employees will be so happy, this won't be a concern, they won't even be interested in joining a union anyway. But that isn't the way it works in Mexico, because what can happen is you'll find that these very aggressive labor union leaders will come around and they will organize your workforce, and next thing you know, you have this very militant, aggressive union on your hands, and they're stopping production and so on. And as we explained, Intel just can't have that kind of situation. So what has been developed over the years is a sort of a way to deal with this. And the SEPROE officials explained, here's what you can do. And they said one solution would be to do what IBM did at the time. Now, at the time, IBM had a huge manufacturing plant, over 10,000 employees, in the vicinity of Guadalajara, in the Silicon Valley of Mexico area. And, but they had found a solution. And what they did is they contracted out the vast majority of the workforce to, these sort of temp agencies. In other words, the employees were only there for 3 months at a time. They weren't permanent employees. And as a result, that didn't require, unionization. So basically, that was the IBM solution. And I remember visiting the IBM manufacturing plant at the time and asking the executive giving me the tour around, I would say, gee, how many of these employees are IBM employees? And he said, oh, of these 10,000, about 500, are executives and so on. So in other words, most of the employees were in this sort of, temporary three-month contract sort of situation and didn't require unionization for that reason. Intel said, we don't like that solution. We want our employees all to be full-time, permanent Intel employees. So this isn't a good solution for us. Well, then the SEPRO-A team, the government officials, by the way, this was a government agency, right? So these were government officials explaining this to Intel, charged with the investment promotion task of the state, of Jalisco. And so they said, well, okay, there's another way around the rules, right? And so this is where Intel really was getting alarmed. And so what the state officials said at SEPRO-A is they said, look, you can just simply have a white union. And a white union is basically a union in name only, you could say. Because what it is it's called a white union because it's white like the dove of peace. And I think it should be called white because it's white like the piece of paper it's written on in some manager's drawer. So let me explain how this works. Basically, what they said is, the law requires if any two of these employees, you have more than 20 employees, and any two of them want to join a union, you have to let them. So what managers can do to preempt this situation is they can form their own union. And the law says that once a union is representing the workers in a company, that's the only union allowed to represent those workers, right? And so what this solution is that the manager will basically have a lawyer draw up a union, document, a union contract, a very official document, and then go around and find very friendly, nice employees, docile employees, right, who would never cause any problems, and say, look, oh, hey, would you like to join a union? All you have to do, don't worry about coming to meetings or anything like that. Just sign your name here, and you'll be in a union, right? And so, just don't worry about, anything like that. Just all you have to do is sign your name. So this would be a document that then the executives could waive or hold up to any, union organizers coming around and say, we're already organized. We already have a union. And the law says that it's only one union representing the workers in any one company, so we have union representation. So in a way, it's meeting the letter of the law, and maybe not really the spirit of the Mexican federal labor law, but it certainly meets the legal requirement. And so SEPRO-A said, this is what you can do, right? And this is a way of avoiding these really aggressive red unions, they're called, the sindicatos rojos, that those are the aggressive militant unions. And sometimes you did find these union organizers coming around from Mexico City and organizing the workforce, and instead having one of these nice sindicato blancos, a white union, white like the dove of peace, or as I mentioned, white like the piece of paper it exists on in some manager's drawer. And I have been in these companies that have these white unions, and I've walked through the plant floor, and I've asked the employees, oh, is there a union here? And they say, no, there's no union here, right? They don't even know. And so I've been doing these kinds of things, and the manager will say, hey, excuse me, I'd like to speak with you in my office for a moment, please, right? And he'll call me in, right? I'm a little bit ticked off, right? He'll call me in and say, look, of course we have a union. And he'll pull out the document from the drawer. We have a white union, right? But we don't have to talk about these kinds of things out there on the plant floor. The workers, most of them don't even need to know about this, and they don't know about it. So this is a practice that is widely done in Mexico. And by the way, I want to tell you, companies, very well-established, respected U.S. companies, do this all the time. Hewlett-Packard has a white union in Mexico. Motorola has a white union in Mexico. Kodak, right? The list goes on and on. So most U.S. companies doing extensive manufacturing in Mexico have this kind of white union arrangement. So Intel, though, when SEPRO-A presented this, they said, oh my gosh, right? This sounds like we're getting around the rules. This sounds like a special deal to us. And they were very alarmed and very concerned that, it was this sort of strange arrangement that they didn't like. So I think that really concerned them when they were speaking to the SEPRO-A officials. They said, oh my gosh, this isn't necessarily this kind of predictable, stable, transparent way of doing things that we're looking for in a location. And you could argue that what they were thinking was, gee, what if someone else, what if a new governor of the state or a new president of Mexico were to get elected and to say, enough of this white union stuff. We have to have the real, not just the letter of the law, we really have to implement the spirit of the law and no more white unions. So I think that kind of thing really alarmed the Intel team. The other issue, of course, was in Mexico, although the costs are so low, the cost for land, the cost of workers, because there is this abundance of skilled workers and engineers, you can get an engineer in Mexico at the time. You could get a very well-trained engineer in Mexico, graduating from the Tech of Monterrey, the MIT of Mexico, at half the cost of an engineer in the United States. So, there were all these attractive things, but really Mexico did not offer significant tax incentives. The federal government didn't really do that, and the state governments didn't have that sort of independence as they did in Brazil to offer significant tax breaks. They could offer things like free land for a manufacturing plant, or they could offer to pay the cost of training workers, for a 6-month period or something like that if a company invested, but they couldn't really offer any significant tax incentives. So that's one other issue. But I think the main issue was this labor union issue, and the issue about the way the CEPROI was presenting it as a way around the rules. It seemed to be a special deal for Intel and really alarmed them. Now, we can discuss, some people might say, gee, I mean, they're like Boy Scouts, it's just they're so rigidly focused on this. But as I explained, this is something I think significant for Intel, because you can imagine what if a new president did get elected and said, we've got to implement, the law fully, not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. And keep in mind that in, 2 major presidential elections, 2006 and 2012, more recent elections, you had a populist candidate, anti-Washington consensus candidate, who, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador is the candidate I'm talking about, AMLO. And I think he really would have been ready to possibly make changes like that. So I think that's the kind of thing that Intel was concerned about.